I first came across your work because of that lecture that you gave in Royal Institution. But then I realized because Richard Dawkins has been one of my great heroes, intellectual heroes. And then when I researched more about you and your book, I realized that you were in that documentary, Enemies of Reason. So, well, it was extremely fascinating to me to see this being researched. But as I talked about this topic more with people around me, they had a very uh, biased and very vague understanding of what parapsychology is and what animalistic psychology is. So, why don't we start over there? Just tell us what is parapsychology, what is animalistic psychology, what are the differences between the two?
Okay. I mean, parapsychology is the attempt to scientifically study paranormal phenomena. And by paranormal phenomena, parapsychologists would typically include ESP, extrasensory perception, and that comes in three different varieties. There's the possibility of telepathy, which would be direct mind-to-mind contact. There is precognition, that's kind of knowing about future events by non-normal means. There is clairvoyance, which is obtaining knowledge about distant locations, again, without using the known sensory channels. So that's the kind of sensory side of psychic abilities. Psychokinesis would also be of interest to parapsychologists. That's the alleged ability to influence the outside world just by willpower or thought alone. And finally, evidence relating to the possibility of life after death. Now, most parapsychologists, but again, not all, but most parapsychologists tend to concentrate on attempting to set up, to investigate whether it is possible that these kinds of phenomena are real. You know, these kind of phenomena that would defy explanation in terms of currently accepted scientific knowledge. Anomalistic psychology tends more to focus on attempts to understand the kind of strange, ostensibly paranormal experiences that people have, but to explain them in non-paranormal terms, typically in psychological terms. Anomalistic psychologists would be more interested in things like the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, tendencies to hallucinate, and so on and so forth. Now, having said that, the two do tend to overlap because parapsychologists do sometimes carry out studies looking at the kind of the non-paranormal explanations for ostensibly paranormal experiences, and we anomalistic psychologists do sometimes directly test paranormal claims, in which case we're doing parapsychology. I think it's more a matter of it's almost kind of like adopting a label, to be perfectly honest. By calling myself an anomalistic psychologist, I suppose I'm making it clear to the outside world that I am skeptical regarding paranormal claims, whereas most parapsychologists are more open to the possibility that some of these phenomena genuinely are paranormal.
So based on that description, it does seems to me like there's an overlap between anomalistic psychology and other fields of psychology, like cognitive psychology and clinical psychology, because recovered memories and false memories, Loftus has done a lot of research on it. And then there is hallucination, which comes under the purview of clinical psychology. So where do these fields overlap, and where there is a distinct difference between the two?
Right. Well, I mean, I would think of anomalistic psychology as being a subdivision, a subdiscipline within psychology. So within psychology, I mean, there are various kind of subdisciplines. Some of them are get their names because of the kind of domain that they are interested in. So, for example, if you're interested in the underlying neural structures, then obviously we'd call that neuropsychology. If you're interested in how cognitive processes work, it's cognitive psychology. If you're interested in how human beings develop over the lifespan, it's developmental psychology. But there are also some subdisciplines of psychology, if you like, the more kind of applied areas, where you're taking the findings from cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, neuropsychology, and seeing how they apply within a particular domain. So, for example, educational psychology is all about how you might apply these other findings to improve education, or occupational psychology, where you're doing the same but with respect to the workplace. Forensic psychology, where you're applying those findings to criminal investigations and so on. So anomalistic psychology is just taking the findings from these other subdisciplines and saying, what can they tell us about the kind of weird experiences that are the primary thing that we're interested in?
Right. So when I was researching to parapsychology, I found that the axioms that the so-called parapsychologists use often tend to be supernatural, paranormal. So, they talk about the side effects. They seem to believe in this before actually researching whether it's actually true or not. So, like, is but so given that assumption, would you consider it to be in the purview of pseudoscience?
I I wrote about this recently, actually, because I've written about it before as well. I am one of the few skeptics. I think I've got a very unusual position insofar as for one thing, I used to believe in a lot of the paranormal stuff myself. And then when I discovered the joys of skepticism, I very much, I think I had looked back now and think that maybe my views were a bit extreme in terms of being very negative about parapsychology. And certainly at that point, for many years, I would have argued that parapsychology was a pseudoscience. But the more parapsychologists that I got to meet and interact with, and realized that actually they weren't all incompetent. A lot of them were highly intelligent people who knew what they were doing, but they still, for whatever reason, believed that there was a possibility that paranormal phenomena might be genuine. And also, a lot of the criticisms that were often directed towards parapsychology actually turned out not really to be true. So people would say, "Oh, parapsychologists don't, only ever report positive results. They don't ever, report failures to find the effects of report." Well, it's just not true. Parapsychologists tend to be more likely to study failed attempts than people in mainstream science, certainly in the kind of the best journals, so to speak. And quite a lot of the other kind of criticisms that were directed at parapsychologists and parapsychology, I kind of began to feel were not actually justified. And at the end of the day, for me, science it's a method. It's first and foremost a method for investigating stuff. Now, if it turns out, I still would bet against the reality of of paranormal phenomena, but you can still kind of investigate these issues scientifically. And another point that I kind of have made on a few occasions is that we've had over the years there have always been some skeptics who were willing to put paranormal claims directly to the test, including people like James Randi, Richard Wiseman, Sue Blackmore, Ray Hyman, the list goes on. Now, and myself, and when we're doing this, we are trying to investigate these things scientifically. We design experiments, we try to control everything as much as we can, and we see what we find. So I would say that then we are doing parapsychology, and we are doing it scientifically. Therefore, at its best, parapsychology can be viewed as being a science. So, yeah, but that's very much, I should emphasize, I think, a minority opinion. I think if you were to ask most people who self-identify as skeptics, if they think parapsychology is a science or a pseudoscience, I'm pretty sure the majority would say a pseudoscience. But I've changed my mind on that one.
It does make me question whether pseudoscience is something is pseudoscience because of its assumption, or is it pseudoscience because of the sort of experiment that it produces? Because one of the things that the sort of intelligent design proponents seem to argue for is that science relies on methodological naturalism, and anything that doesn't come under that purview, it rejects as being pseudoscience. So their claim is essentially that we do believe in supernatural explanations, but that does not mean that intelligent design is necessarily pseudoscience, because scientists actually did believe in its sort of theistic design and walked under this purview for millennia. Newton did, lots of other scientists did. So based on that, can you really classify something as pseudoscience because of its uh, axioms rather than due to its results and the way things are done?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say, I mean, the thing is, we all come to any of these situations with preconceptions. We might, and I think the one thing, I'm a great supporter of the scientific method. The reason being that it's an approach that recognizes that we may have these biases and has means to try to control for any possible biases. So, for example, if we're testing paranormal claims, if we get somebody who comes along and claims to have some amazing ability that they can discern things about complete strangers without any, without using cold reading or without talking to them in any way, without communicating with them, fine, we can put that to the test. And we will design a test which we feel is adequately controlled and which the person feels is a fair test of their claims. Now, the fact that I don't believe that they're going to be able to do it, and they are sincerely convinced that they will be able to do it, so be it. That's the way that things are. Anybody that ever tells you that they are just a completely neutral assessor of the evidence is very naive, because we're not. We come to any situation with preconceived notions that we've developed as a result of our own personal experience and education and all kinds of other things that we've gone through during our lifespan. And we come, those things are there. There's nothing we can do. I can't switch off my disbelief in someone's psychic abilities. That's there already. But if they genuinely have this ability, they ought to be able to demonstrate it. And if they agree that it's a fair test, that's all we can do. You do sometimes get the argument from believers in the paranormal that skeptics give off negative vibes, and that the reason they can't perform when they're asked to do so by a skeptic is because of the skeptic's disbelief. Well, logically, that's a possibility, but there's nothing I can do about that. So all I can say is that, well, we did our best to put your claim to the test, and in our tests, you were not able to demonstrate your abilities. It's not going to, it usually doesn't convince, well, almost never will it convince the claimant that they do not have these abilities, and it also won't convince their supporters. But as we did with our test of dowsing that you've referred to, we got all of the people taking part to sign something in advance saying this was a fair test of their abilities. And then, when they were tested in a proper double-blind control conditions, they all failed. I don't think any of them went away thinking, oh, in that case, then dowsing doesn't work.
So given that, do you think that the scientific materialistic approach is better than the sort of parapsychology approach, or is it just a matter of different beliefs?
I think, well, again, I don't think science has all the answers, and I don't. So it will depend upon the particular claims that are being made. The scientific method, for me, is appropriate if you are making some claim about something that happens in the real world that we can measure. If you are making kind of much vaguer claims, well, they may well not be. So when people kind of come out with arguments about, oh, well, science doesn't have all the answers, how do you explain love? And all this kind of thing. Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. I'm happy to accept that love exists, and that, you know, there are approaches you could adopt. You know, you can talk about kind of what's going on in people's brains when they experience love and so on and so forth. But I don't feel the need to say that science has all the answers. But if you are making a specific claim that that can be tested under properly controlled conditions, well, fine, we'll test it, you know. And then people can make their own mind up. If you at the end of the day want to adopt a belief system that says, you know, I'm going to continue to believe that God exists, you know, even if it can't be proved, you know, I kind of find it helps me in my life to believe that God exists. Fine, you go ahead and believe that God exists. I don't have to agree with you. But the only kind of time that I would ever take issue with someone else's beliefs is when those beliefs are having a negative effect on other people. But beyond that, you can believe anything you like, you know. And as a psychologist, I'm aware of the fact that there are kind of certain kind of neurological conditions, quite often quite rare. People can end up with some totally bizarre beliefs that they believe with 100% conviction. You know, there are kind of medical syndromes where people believe that they themselves are dead. You know, so you can talk to these people and say, but how can you be dead if you're talking to me now? And they'll just say, well, dead people can talk. You know? So it is kind of really weird what people can believe. But at the end of the day, you know, science is all about trying to understand to the best of our ability the way the universe really is. And it may well be that the answers that science comes up with are not answers that a lot of people feel very reassured by or find very emotionally satisfying. But I think for the scientist, truth is much more important than what makes you feel good, or, you know, what you might have a belief in for various other reasons. It's the evidence that counts. It's the data that counts.
But why test these phenomena from a scientific perspective? Like, shouldn't these phenomena be the matter of different domains? Like, one, like, this is the science, this is like the NOMA, you know, as Stephen, non-overlapping magisteria. So given the fact that most of these phenomena, you know, fail the scientific test, why waste time?
Well, I mean, again, when skeptics say there's no evidence for telepathy or for precognition or for X, Y, and Z, it's usually a big overstatement.
Yeah.
There is evidence. It's the quality of the evidence and how we interpret the evidence that's important. So, I mean, for me, a hugely important part of skepticism is being open to the possibility that you might be wrong. New evidence might go. I mean, you know, as the parapsychologists are very fond of pointing out, there are endless examples of people in the history of science who have declared that this or that, you know, the idea that meteors were rocks falling from the sky, you know, that was dismissed by Lavoisier as well. We know that can't be true because there are no rocks in the sky. Yeah, he was wrong. And there are numerous other examples of that where claims have been dismissed by the vast majority of scientists, only to then go on and find out, actually, no, those ideas, those hypotheses were true. There's an awful lot more where the kind of claims that are dismissed by the scientists actually do turn out to be wrong. You know, just because the mainstream science rejects it doesn't make it true, you know, and that's the other side of the coin. But as I say, I think it's always important to be open to the possibility that you might be wrong. I have to say, another reason for putting these claims to the test, from my perspective, is partly in terms of kind of public engagement type activities, to say, yeah, I'm open-minded enough to actually say, well, might this be true? You know, just because I don't believe in it, or I can't see any mechanism whereby it can work, I might be wrong. So just let's, you know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Let's see what happens. Can you really make objects levitate? Can you really read people's minds? let's put it to the test. So there's a kind of PR side to it, the public relations side of, it does allow me, when people accuse me, as often they will, like as they will with other skeptics as well, of being closed-minded, I can honestly say, look, I've put more effort and time and resources into testing these claims than you ever have. So, how can you say that I'm the closed-minded one? If I run these tests and these experiments and the results supported the existence of these phenomena, maybe by some mechanism that as yet we don't understand, well, so be it. But so far, that's not happened, I mean, at the moment, I'm engaged in a small way in a study of lucid dreaming. The kind of this phenomenon where people are become aware that they are dreaming, and this is a genuine phenomenon. This is recognised as being a real thing. But I was contacted by a lucid dreamer, very very interesting, a guy, pretty much a skeptic himself. But he'd also been in contact with a parapsychologist who wondered, a lot of parapsychologists believe that dreams are a very beneficial state when it comes to paranormal phenomena, psychic abilities, whether you could use lucid dreaming to see into the future. And so at the moment, I'm kind of, as I say, taking part in this study with a lucid dreamer and a parapsychologist. My role is purely to kind of act as the middleman to make sure that he isn't sent the target until after he's had the lucid dream, and that she doesn't get the transcript until after I've sent him the, so on and so forth. But yeah, I'm quite happy to do that. I don't expect that there will be positive results from it, but it's an interesting experience to go through anyway. But yeah, I most of my effort goes into the more skeptical side of coming up with potentially, coming up with non-paranormal explanations for ostensibly paranormal phenomena and putting those explanations to the test. But I keep an eye on what's going on in mainstream parapsychology as well, because as I say, I might be wrong. There are certain claims within parapsychology that I don't think the skeptics could claim to have, definitively dismissed and have arguments against. There are some phenomena there that still, I think, are worthy of further study.
Right. So I would want you to elaborate on that, but I also think one of the reasons that this needs to be investigated is the fact that so many people believe in it. Like, this is important to the human experience across cultures. They may experience it differently, but it's an important part of being human, and so we need to understand what the causes are and why it's happening and why we tend to see patterns when there are not any. So that's a very good reason to do this.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, to my mind, there's only kind of two possibilities, given that every society in geographically and historically have always had these belief systems, and a sizable minority of the population claim they've had direct personal experience of the paranormal. So that either means that at least some of those experiences genuinely were paranormal, and if that's the case, it would be an amazing scientific breakthrough to establish that. Or if they're not genuinely paranormal, then what's going on when people have those experiences? And by studying that, we can learn about the human mind. In the same way that we learn a lot about normal visual perception by studying visual illusions. With the visual illusions, we know that that line isn't really longer than that line, and we know that these lines aren't curved even though they look it, and so on. But we can learn a lot about normal visual perception by studying those kind of optical illusions. If a lot of ostensibly paranormal experiences are based on cognitive illusions, again, we can learn a lot about the way the mind works.
Do you think paranormal experiences differ according to geographical backgrounds, that some people in, say, the West have different kind of paranormal experiences than those in the East? Like, is that one of the things that you've looked into?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, very, very definitely in the case of something like, say, sleep paralysis. One of the things that I find fascinating is the fact that you've got something there that we in broad terms we do understand the science behind it, but you've got the same core experience, but it's interpreted in different ways in different cultures, even to some extent, sometimes actually influencing the imagery of what people experience during the experience. And again, it's not too surprising. The same can be said for near-death experiences. You've got the same common core experience, but in different cultures, it will be experienced in somewhat different ways because of the kind of beliefs that people bring to the experience itself. So, you've got that lovely interaction between kind of the culture and the belief system and the underlying, often physiological effects that are causing some kind of weird experience.
I think that from the skeptic community, there is sort of inherent dislike for all sort of parapsychologists, or those who claim to believe in this phenomenon, as charlatans. Essentially, they're deceiving people. And but when I looked into some of the parapsychologists, some of the people who have done research on it, when I looked into the work of for instance, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who has done research in reincarnation, it was pretty clear to me that he actually believed in what he was saying, that he was actually taking the effort to research and go out and study these cases. So to claim that there is no research, or that there is no attempt to falsify or prove their claims would just be wrong.
I
So what
I
do
think
you think of before you go on, I just wanted to know your opinion on Stevenson's research, because it was quite fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree. I only ever met him on one occasion, but I mean, I'm familiar with his work, and I agree with you. My impression is that there was somebody who genuinely believed in the possibility of reincarnation, who devoted, virtually his entire career to investigating that in the best way that he saw possible. And this notion that, again, as I say, this is going back to what I mentioned earlier, that when I first got into skepticism, so to speak, I'm not blaming the people whose books I was reading at the time, but I kind of initially had the impression that pretty much all parapsychologists were either incompetent or untrustworthy, or fool. I had very negative views. It was only then, as I got to know some of them quite, in some cases very well. For example, the late Robert Morris, who was the Koestler Chair in Parapsychology up at Edinburgh. I thought he had a very, very kind of enlightened approach. He welcomed skeptics into his department and wanted them to kind of he used to say, if you can see anything wrong with the way that we're trying to study this, anything we're not controlled for, please do tell us, and we'll put that right. He was very aware of skeptical explanations for the phenomena that he was interested in, as well as also being open to the possibility that they might be real. And so the approach that department had under his leadership basically did the two things that I've just been talking about. On the one hand, they tended to devote more time to directly testing paranormal claims than I do, but they also had a stream of research that looked at situations that might look as if they're psychic, but they're not. Just looking at the psychology of that side of things, and that had a big influence on kind of my own approach, really. And as I say, apart from the fact that the emphasis was different in the two units, they were pretty much the same approach. And so people like him, and kind of various others that I met over there, you realize, yes, they're not stupid. In fact, very often the parapsychologists were kind of ahead of the game in terms of, compared to mainstream scientists, because they had to be. I remember, Bob Morris used to say that when they ran an experiment, it was the equivalent of a chemist having to say, yes, we did remember to wash the test tubes before we started, because they knew that any positive results they produced would be that the skeptics would go over them with a fine tooth comb and find every little methodological error that was there to be found. And so they had to try and be ultra careful in the design, in the statistics, and so on. And at the moment, as you may well be aware, kind of psychology as a discipline is going through what's called a replication crisis, where it's not only parapsychology that has problems with replication, it also affects psychology, not to the same extent. There are hundreds of effects within psychology that are replicable and robust, and you can demonstrate at the drop of a hat. But there are also others that have become accepted and appear in all the standard textbooks that probably are not real. Now, the question then is, well, how did they arise in the first place? And then we get onto the whole kind of question of what are called questionable research practices, which is not out and out fraud, but just kind of giving yourself the benefit of the doubt. Within psychology, certainly when I was a student, well, from that point on, you knew that if you were going to have a chance of publishing a scientific finding, you had to get a statistically significant effect. P had to be less than 0.05. And there would be situations where you could try analyzing your results this way and you don't get the effect. Oh, but if you analyze it this way, you do, so you'd kind of say, oh, well, that's fine, then I'll report this. But you're giving yourself kind of 2 bites at the cherry. And those kinds of decisions where you kind of give yourself the benefit of the doubt at this point and at that point and so on can have a cumulative effect, so that a lot of the effects that are reported, and this is particularly a problem for the so-called top journals, because they're not interested in negative findings. They only want significant results. And they also tend to want novel findings, not just you trying to replicate what somebody else has done. And therefore, they don't represent the vast majority of research that's going on, where people, are failing to get effects quite often. And certainly if we're told replication is the cornerstone of science, but if you try to get a straight replication published, nobody will be interested. So it kind of, that whole kind of replication crisis in psychology really kind of made me reflect on parapsychology, because I genuinely was interested by the fact that, the parapsychologists would report effects which, when I or people I was working with tried to replicate them, we didn't get the same results. And we seemed to be following the same procedures. But so what was going on there? And within parapsychology, they talk about what's called a sheep-goat effect, where the sheep are the believers in the paranormal. So if you have an experimenter who believes in the paranormal, they believe that you're more likely to get significant positive results than if you have a skeptical experimenter. Well, that is probably explained by the fact that if I run an experiment to test a paranormal claim, I will design the experiment, I'll run the experiment, I'll analyze the data, and if the data doesn't come out as significant, I just stop, because that's what I expected anyway. Whereas if I was a parapsychologist, I might be tempted to have a close look at the data and maybe transform it statistically and maybe rule out some outliers and do all these other things that I personally would quite happily do if I was running a psychology experiment without thinking I was doing anything wrong. It's not that this is out and out fraud. It's much more subtle than that. And so I think a lot of these kind of questionable research practices, which, as I say, are not out and out fraud, but they are less than best practice, they can sometimes lead to what appear to be significant results, real effects that actually aren't. And then you kind of, okay, so if we accept that that happens in psychology, it's also going to happen in parapsychology. And maybe, just maybe, all of the effects that are reported in parapsychology are down to these questionable research practices. All of science is about trying to separate the signal from the noise. what would a science look like if all you had was noise? Well, maybe it'd look like parapsychology. Maybe that's all that's going on there. I don't know, but I increasingly coming around to that kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, so I actually recently read a book on that. It's written by your colleague, actually, Stuart Ritchie.
Yeah,
It's
great,
called
great. Yeah,
Great book, and very fun to read as well.
yeah, yeah.
Do you think that the replication crisis could be because parapsychology is relatively new? Because we see this kind of effects much more prominently in fields like evolutionary psychology. Now, all the time you see new results popping up, and journalists, and because all of these are interesting just so stories, so they do kind of tend to publish that more often, and you know do results with very small effect sizes. So I recently read a psychology paper by a prominent evolutionary psychology with the effect size of 40. Right? So that's hilarious. So I'm wondering if parapsychology is going to do the same thing, that it will eventually grow up and become a real science as it um, as it becomes older.
I don't know. It's an interesting one. I mean, a lot of parapsychologists would point out, and I think that they'd be correct in doing so, that the kind of collective efforts in terms of person hours that have gone into investigating parapsychological phenomena is minute compared to other areas of science. It's the equivalent of something like 2 weeks worth of research within, say, mainstream psychology. So they would say, on that basis, it's not fair to judge us and say, oh, there's definitely, there's nothing going on here, why are you wasting your time? And I think there's some merit in that argument. There's also the kind of the whole question of what do you do about kind of very small effect sizes? Because on the one hand, you can argue that, well, even if it's a very small effect size, if it's real and if it's replicable, and then there's something there that needs to be explained. And again, I have some sympathy with that argument. And very often within parapsychology, the effect sizes are tiny. Take studies of psychokinesis, whether people can influence the output from a random event generator, random number generator, just purely by the power of thought. The effects are kind of minute, they're tiny. But if they're real, do they need to be explained? Or would you take the position which some people do, that if they're so tiny, then even if you can't kind of explain what might be the kind of artifactual methodological problem that's causing them to come out that way, it's not worth worrying about. They're so small, they just don't matter. And again, I don't really know, I don't have a definitive answer on that one. I tend to kind of feel that, within some other areas of science, really small effect sizes are taken seriously. But the problem with psychology and parapsychology and all other social sciences is that the data are inherently messy. If you're a chemist, if you add this compound to that compound, you get a reaction that results in this compound and that compound, and it happens every single time. So very often in the natural sciences, people are not aware of the need for double-blind controls and stuff like that. And again, it's perfectly understandable because, like I say, they can plot their results and they get nice, clean, straight lines. You plot your results in a psychology experiment and they're all over the place, and you're kind of then, doing regression analyses and so on to try and figure out, have you really got some kind of effect there or not? And so, it's kind of ironic that the mainstream scientists who often criticize their parapsychologists for not doing experiments properly, not controlling things properly, you're much more likely to use kind of double-blind procedures in parapsychology than you are to do so in biology or chemistry. But yeah, as I say, it's understandable. And I do have a lot of time for the argument that if you are claiming to have found results that, if accepted as valid, would completely overturn our scientific understanding of the universe, then the evidence does have to be stronger. I can look back now over stuff that I've published over the years and probably kind of could say, although we got a paper out of this, I now don't think it's a genuine effect. I think it was just one of those spurious effects that, at the time we published in good faith, but we weren't able to replicate and so on and so forth. But none of the things that I have published ask you that if you accept them, you completely reject the current scientific view of the universe. If I'm asking you to do that, then I better have really strong evidence. And so far, parapsychology, I don't think, has produced that kind of evidence.
So I think one of the reasons it happens in psychology is because psychology deals with human beings, and human beings are complex people.
Yep.
No two human beings are similar.
Exactly.
So you have to keep all of the extraneous variables and things like that in mind before you come to a conclusion. So it's obvious that what works for one person will not work for the other.
Yeah.
So given that, let's say you're presented with a hypothetical reincarnation scenario where a person is claims to be someone else, and then when you find out that after researching that this person actually existed and that he has family members, and this person who has never been to that geographical area suddenly goes and recognizes all of the family members. So this is one of the things that Stevenson reports.
Yeah.
Now, in that situation, would it not be logical to sort of leap to the best explanation, because we don't have sufficient materialist explanation? So the inference to the best explanation there would be that, well, there is something paranormal here. If not reincarnation, then maybe telepathy or something like that. So what do you make of it?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think, as I say, I took part in a documentary back in the last century, because I'm very old. It went out I think it was broadcast in 1998. And this was obviously for a TV program, but it was the most interesting kind of TV program I ever took part in. We went to Lebanon to investigate reincarnation claims amongst the Druze, which are a particular religious sect, mostly based in Lebanon, but all around the Middle East and further afield. And reincarnation is a central part of their religion. And a lot of the kids growing up in their society claim that they can remember past lives. Now, I kind of won't go into all the details here, but obviously, I have not done anywhere near the amount of field research that someone like Ian Stevenson's done. But it did get me thinking about his work and that of similar other people, and possible kind of other explanations for these kinds of cases as they arise. And my feeling is that we're probably dealing there with false memories that have arisen in kind of various ways. I mean, it is very, very inherently difficult research to do. You would have to rule out the possibility of any normal means of that information becoming available to the person who's claiming reincarnation, which is often difficult to do. You'd have to rule out the possibility. You typically are finding that these claims are being investigated years and years after the first contact between the child who claimed to be reincarnated and the past life family. So is the account that you are being given now actually accurate? It may be given sincerely and honestly, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. We know that eyewitness testimony can be unreliable. We know that stories can change in the retelling and so on. So you've got all of those kinds of factors to deal with. I mean, the thing that I say that the investigation, such as it was, of the cases in Lebanon for this TV program, I did come away feeling, I went out there not knowing what to expect. Because I mean, I'd read some of Ian Stevenson's stuff, plus some other stuff. And I had not really got any clear expectations of what I was going to find when I got out there. When I came away, I was more convinced than when I went out that we were probably dealing with false memories in these cases. Now, that doesn't mean to say that false memories is the explanation in all cases. We can be absolutely certain that it's the correct explanation when it comes to hypnotic past life regression. There's all kinds of reasons for being certain that those reports are false memories. And that means, that at the very least, that establishes that some of these claims are based on false memories. And so therefore, I think the burden of proof is on those who say, yes, but they're not all, they can't all be explained that way, to absolutely establish beyond any doubt that any of these other possible explanations could be the correct explanation. So we'll see. That's why we have to have an open mind. I mean, when I went out to take part in this documentary, I was reading Carl Sagan's book at the time, and he identified 3 areas that he thought within parapsychology that he thought were worthy of further study, and one of them was children claiming
the
past life.
demon hunted world.
That's the one. Yeah. And I'd agree with him. The 3 areas that he identified were 3 that I thought, and I still think there are some areas within parapsychology, as I said before, that are a challenge to skeptics. And it's kind of interesting studying those kind. It's interesting studying parapsychology, even if, as I said before, it is a case where there's actually no signal, it's all noise, but it's telling us something about the limits of the scientific method, so even then we're going to learn something worth knowing.
Because it will tell you certain phenomena which we have not been able to explain as of yet, because we do know that this happens in children, that children remembering past lives. We just don't have a good enough explanation for that, and because it differs from person to person, but the phenomenon itself is real, and skeptics would normally shrug it off. So I think that this needs to be more researched. Because I am a skeptic, I don't think that it will really find a paranormal effect or anything like that, but we do need to research how much does it affect a person's mental health, how, what sort of lives they lead, what is their background, what sort of families they grown up in. But these are interesting things to know, just from a basic psychology perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. And it goes back to that point that you made before, and that I've made several times myself, that whether or not paranormal phenomena are real, what is undeniable is that many, many, many people believe in them. And many people, not as many, but many people say they've had direct personal experience of them. So there's something there for psychology to address and to try and explain. So either way, one possibility is that would end up kind of establishing that some of these phenomena genuinely were paranormal. That would be a tremendous breakthrough. I don't expect it to happen, but if it did, it would be amazing. Or we learn something insightful about the human mind. So either way, it's worth taking them seriously.
Well, I think that it will not remain paranormal if you have an explanation, because then it will come
no, exactly, yeah. I mean, I usually kind of avoid. For one thing, this is why I call myself an anomalistic psychologist. I don't like being introduced as a parapsychologist because I'm not one. I'm a psychologist with an interest in paranormal claims, but they are an important part of the human experience, and so therefore they should be of interest to psychologists. Just to kind of say, that's all nonsense, therefore we don't need to pay any attention to it, I think is missing an important part of the human experience.
So, what do you think is the reason for these paranormal the origin? Do you think that these are instinctual responses because of evolutionary exaptations, byproducts, or do you think that these are evolutionary adaptations? And if these are adaptations, then is it really fair, or is it a good thing to do to and so people that what you're believing is essentially wrong and BS? So, but if it makes them feel good, then is it really good to investigate and just ruin their beliefs when it's benefiting them?
Well, no, again, well, there's two important
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
So we'll separate them. The first one is, why do so many people seem predisposed to believe in the paranormal, to interpret events around them in paranormal terms, etc., etc. And I think that is very much a consequence of evolution. Our brains have evolved to keep us alive for long enough to pass our genes on to the next generation. That's the end of story. And in those terms, if you think about it from the point of view of like Daniel Kahneman's ideas about thinking fast and slow and so on, a superficial level, you might think, well, why have we got these cognitive biases that lead us to come to the wrong conclusion? Surely they should have evolved out, and we should just, have accurate perception and interpretation of what's going on around us. But in terms of our evolutionary history, given that we've got these two different modes of thought, the kind of very quick, intuitive, effortless intuition, if you like, for want of a better label, versus the more slow, effortful, rational reasoning type of thought. Again, everybody always gives the same example, so I will give it. You've got the kind of Stone Age man. There's something rustling in the bushes. Is it a saber-toothed tiger or not? And the one who decides on basis of instinct, really intuition, that yes, it is, and gets away, will, even if they're wrong, they've not lost very much. Whereas if you take longer by relying on this slower thought process, and then you're wrong, you become lunch, and you don't get to pass on your genes to the next generation. So our brains have evolved to, if you like, be threat averse. It's safer to make the mistake of thinking there is something there when there isn't, than missing something that really is there. And so we have got these biases, as I say, to assume, well, there is something there. We also have a kind of default bias to assume that when something happens in the world around us, someone or something made it happen. And again, that could be a potential threat. So we tend to, that tapping at the window in the night could just be the wind blowing a branch against the window, but it could be an intruder, and so on and so forth. And also, we've evolved to be very, very good at pattern recognition, and to finding connections between things, and to seeing meaning and significance. But again, we sometimes overplay it. We think we've seen meaning and significance where it isn't in fact really there, but that's another factor that comes into play. So in answer to your first question, yes, I think it's very much that our brains have evolved to be wired to make us predisposed towards those kinds of interpretations of what's going on around us. With respect to the second question of whether we should always try and debunk people's claims and say, no, that's wrong, that's bullshit. I think that's something that I kind of have in some of the stuff I've written, made this kind of distinction between what I call a kind of type 1 skepticism and type 2 skepticism. And the type 1 skepticism is the kind of skepticism that I adopted when I first became a skeptic, which is kind of very much kind of, I think they're kind of overly negative. And one aspect of that was kind of seeing all kind of paranormal beliefs as being kind of potentially damaging and so on. But actually, the fact that they are so common probably indicates that they of some kind of psychological benefit for people. I mean, there's some very obvious examples, like if you believe in life after death, you probably have a reduced fear of death. But lots of other ways as well in which people can find those kind of beliefs comforting. Well, now I will, if I'm asked as a scientist, getting back to what I said before, science is more about truth than about feeling good. And so if I am asked what my view is on a particular claim, I will give you my honest opinion based on the evidence as I see it. But I'm not necessarily on a kind of crusade to convince everybody who believes in God that no, there is no God. I suppose this is where perhaps myself and Richard Dawkins would kind of differ somewhat. I can see that, well, it gets back to what I said before. If I see somebody else has got a belief system and that they're trying to push onto others, or that their own belief system means that it has implications for others around them that are kind of damaging, then I think it's legitimate to kind of criticize that, to attack that. But you can believe whatever the heck you want, as long as it doesn't have any negative effects on other people, as far as I'm concerned. But if you want to know what I believe and why I believe it, I will tell you.
So I think that these beliefs can also be divided into two parts. One is the kind of beliefs that are relatively harmless, and then the other is the kind of beliefs that are harmless, not just to others, but to the person believing in them as well. So, for instance, a lot of people in India will not take medicines because they believe in, paranormal phenomena and because of chants and spells and things like that. So, and same for people with mental health, they're usually treated by the, a sort of priest-like figure who comes on, the possession kind of thing. So these beliefs are harmful. On the other hand, if you believe in God and have a decent life, then there's no problem with that as it comes to society or even to yourself. I mean, if it leads you to commit some charitable acts or things like that. So I think that the second kind of beliefs does need a sort of radical approach because in India, skeptics do go into villages to do magic tricks and show how these.
Oh, I love those guys. They're great. I'm a huge fan. The kind of Indian rationalists. Those that wonderful documentary about what was it called now? It was about Premanand, and the Indian rationalists would go into the villages and perform all the same tricks as the god men.
Okay, it's on the it was on the BBC. It was the Sai Baba
Guru
yeah,
bust.
the guru busters. Yeah.
And had that wonderful clip where they're pulling a jeep along with ropes with hooks through the flesh on the back. And this is the skeptics that are doing it. I used to show that in my lectures, and a lot of I'd warn the students, if you're squeamish, don't watch this. But that was amazing footage. But yeah, no, I agree entirely. That and of course, there are some beliefs which have both positive and negative sides to them. You mentioned there's no question at all that some beliefs in possession and exorcism, I, like you, would view as being kind of nothing but negative. Certainly, we get cases in the UK of situations where within families, if you have a very kind of unruly child, they may believe that the child is possessed by a demon, and they'll physically beat the child, to try and exorcise the demon, which obviously is in my view, totally unacceptable. But again, if you look at a lot of instances of what gets labeled as exorcism in America, where there are lots of unofficial exorcisms, and in those cases, you can actually kind of see what the benefit is to the person, to kind of everybody that's involved, if you like. On the one hand, you've got the person who is the exorcist, who is obviously seen as being this amazingly powerful figure who is doing battle against the kind of ultimate evil, and through faith in God is being victorious and successful, you've got the kind of wider community for whom that whole kind of process reinforces their religious beliefs and makes them even more sure that their religion is the one true religion, and so on. You've even got the person who is being exorcised. What's in it for them? Well, actually, if you think about it, if you have been, let's say, you've been somebody who used to go around getting drunk, getting into fights, treating women badly, etc., etc. Well, now you've got the explanation that that wasn't you. That was a demon that made you do it. And now you can go through this ritual and you can be forgiven for all that because it wasn't you in the first place. So, there are kind of advantages for everybody in that kind of situation. Even though in general, I'd say, the belief in kind of demons and exorcism is a bad thing, even that can have benefits to particular societies.
Well, this also happens in like normal secular psychology therapist session, the therapist. So I recently read Jordan Peterson's second book. So he talks about how he hypnotizes his client and extracts their fears and recovered memories and things like that. But from Loftus' research, you do know that this is bollocks and has no evidence. But if it makes the person feel good, like, then what's the harm? It's much like placebo.
It is a difficult one, and I think it's one that I think there's a tendency on the part of some skeptics to assume that it's always better to have a true and accurate view of the way the universe is. But there's an awful lot of evidence that suggests that in itself is not true. That people that we would judge to be psychologically healthy typically would display what we call unrealistic optimism. They have a view of the world and the universe around them which is actually too rosy. So if you give psychologically healthy people questionnaires to fill in about the chances that various really good things will happen to them, or that various really bad things will happen to them, they will tend to overestimate the chances of the good stuff and underestimate the chances of the bad stuff. If you give the same questionnaires to depressives, they are much more accurate. And so the bottom line here is that life really is shit. But you will enjoy life more if you've managed to fool yourself that it isn't. Who would want to swap places with a depressive? They don't seem to have very happy lives, So even though they may have a more accurate view of life, I think it's a nice example of a situation where actually it's a good thing to be a bit deluded. It's a good thing to not have such an accurate view. And there are lots of other examples as well. Stuart Weiss has got a book coming out soon, which is all about these kind of positive delusions, the kind of times when it's maybe not so great to have an accurate view of what's going on.
But I do get the impulse to make that deontological claim because it may eventually lead to someone else's life being destroyed. If you recovered memories of you being abused by a certain person, then that person's life is going to be destroyed. So there is an argument to be made for the other side as well.
Oh no, I'd agree entirely there. I'm on the scientific and advisory board of the British False Memory Society, so I'm very, very aware of the issues that you're talking about. And again, that's a situation where, well, there's two aspects to that. First of all, there is no evidence to suggest that people who go through this recovered memory type therapies and recover memories of being the victims of childhood sexual abuse, they typically don't get better as a result of that. They get worse. So before going into therapy, okay, they had problems, they had issues, that's why they went into therapy, but often they were holding down a job and they were married and so on and so forth. But as a result of the therapy, they become worse. They become more depressed and more anxious. They lose their job. They end up getting divorced and their life just goes completely to pieces. So it doesn't even help the individual on the one hand, And obviously it doesn't help anybody that they then falsely accuse of having abused them. So yeah, I mean, I think in those cases I think there's a kind of there's kind of some interesting issues that arise with respect to false memory research. I mean, one of the questions that people sometimes ask is, supposing that you could kind of do the opposite and convince somebody who genuinely had an awful childhood that in fact they didn't, they had a happy childhood. If you could implant false memories into that person, would you be morally and ethically justified in doing so? And again, it's kind of it's a tricky one, because if we had the technology to be able to play around with people's memories like that, it'd be an awfully powerful technique to fall into the wrong hands, So, again, I think these are interesting things. I don't know what the answers are, but they're interesting things to think about and to give some thought to.
Yeah, well, I think nobody has the correct answers because, like I said, things that work for some will not work for others. So
Absolutely.
you have to be extremely careful when talking about real living human beings with the past and present. Right. So I wanted to ask you whether there is an example of any paranormal research paper or findings that meets the standard of mainstream science.
I think it would depend what you exactly you mean by the standard of mainstream science. I mean, if you mean, are there any papers published within parapsychology where they have used appropriate scientific methodology? The answer to that would definitely be yes. You can always find examples of methodologically sloppy stuff in all areas of science, but if you just looked at the kind of best examples within parapsychology, then the answer would be yes. But does something have to meet the standards of science? Does that mean that you have to actually get positive, significant results? That's a different question, So I mean, I think if parapsychology, if there's one potential criterion of pseudoscience where parapsychology might be said to fail, it would probably be the kind of lack of any real progress over a relatively long period. But having said that, we've already made the point, we've already discussed that there are so few people who are actively doing research in that area that even that might not be a fair criticism. But parapsychology in one form or another, systematic investigation of paranormal claims has been going on now for a century and a half, and there isn't a single robust replicable phenomenon that you could say use as the basis of a first-year lab class on a psychology course. There just isn't anything, and I think that in itself is a kind of condemnation, that may and an indication that, well, maybe there isn't anything there, not even one single demonstration. But there are certain areas where, again, acknowledging that the data are messy and that the results don't always replicate, but sometimes they do seem to, and so on and so forth. I think there are certainly areas of potential interest that, I mean, to give you one specific example, there is a phenomenon that's been reported by several parapsychologists where it's claimed that if you imagine you were in an experiment and we're just looking at your physiological arousal levels as we show you various images one after another, and then unexpectedly, amongst all these kind of fairly neutral images, a really horrible, shocking image comes up, we would see your arousal levels go up, in terms of skin conductance, etc., etc. Now, it is claimed that if you look closely at the data, that the arousal level begins to go up before the picture is presented, just shortly before. In other words, it's evidence for some form of precognition. I am not aware of any definitive critique from skeptics of that body of research. I will say that I had a postgraduate student who tried to replicate those effects and failed, but that was just one example. So So there's, it's possible that that's a real effect. I don't see how it could possibly work, but hey, I'm not a physicist. Maybe I'm wrong.
I know you've been asked this before, and you did hint at one example, but I still want to ask you because this is very interesting stuff. Um, Anything that you were not able to explain?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I gave you one example there of a kind of technique that implies that there may be certain aspects of precognition that maybe have some support that haven't been definitively ruled out by skeptics. I think there are some other areas where there is a possibility. I mean, the Ganzfeld type studies are another area where there are some results which have been promised in the past. The problem with parapsychology is that you just seem to get a kind of series of false dawns where it's claimed that right now we've got this methodology, this paradigm that does produce a reliable, replicable effect. And then after a few years, people seem to lose interest in it and go on to something else. And then this is the one now. This is the Holy Grail. And that pattern seems to be kind of repeated. I mean, for a long time, it was the so-called Ganzfeld that was seen as being the most promising area. And it might still be, but I think what the parapsychologists need to do is to figure out what they believe are the kind of optimal conditions to demonstrate telepathy or precognition or whatever else it may be. And then the problem is that they'll then if they then run some big study and get null results, they won't conclude, oh, well, there is no effect there then. They'll just come up with some explanation or just ignore that finding and just carry on. And I think this is the problem, that there are enough positive results that are reported, possibly as a result of questionable research practices, possibly just as a result of statistical variation, that if you already believe that these effects are real, they provide enough encouragement to go on with the search. I mean, we know from kind of behaviorism that kind of partial reinforcement is a very, very powerful way of keeping people and animals doing things, and because there are enough occasional results, but what we really want, obviously, is some kind of cookbook, some kind of recipe that says, right, if you have these conditions in place, you have got a very, very good chance of being able to demonstrate this effect. And I just don't think they've managed to come up with that. And I suppose I've got to the point in my own head that I'm quite happy for them to carry on. If they want to carry on and they can come up with something, then fine. If they can come up with something that really is a good demonstration and convinces the wider scientific community, well, good luck to them. That'd be great. But personally, I would prefer to put my time into the kind of more skeptical side of things, where I'm looking at things like the power of suggestion to make people think something paranormal has happened when it actually hasn't. And looking at kind of false memories and sleep paralysis and all those kind of things. These are things which we know are real. There's no question at all about that. And even if ultimately it turns out that the parapsychologists did get to a point where they could prove that some paranormal phenomena were genuine, would have done them a favor by helping them to sort out the stuff that was real from the stuff that only looked as if it was real. So it's still worth doing. We know that one thing that I think I would say with as near certainty as somebody who thinks of themselves as a scientist could ever say is that most of the time, perhaps all of the time, but certainly, definitely most of the time, when people believe they have had a paranormal experience, there is a plausible non-paranormal explanation. So, I'll concentrate on those. And if other people want to put the paranormal claims to the direct test, fine, carry on. I have no objection, but I'm not going to put much more of my time into doing that.
Well, I completely agree with that. As Carl Sagan would say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidences. So I had a great time talking with you. It was an absolute honor. And I learned a lot of things from our conversation and a lot of things from your book, which is kind of written in an accessible but textbook style. So I absolutely love that as well. And you've been, uh, I would like to thank you first for introducing me to this field because it is really fascinating stuff, weird stuff, but fascinating, certainly. So before you go, did you enjoy the conversation?
I did indeed. Yeah, yeah. I should just say, by the way, that I'm writing a popular science book at the moment on anomalistic psychology, which is meant to be kind of obviously even more accessible than the textbook was. So hopefully that'll be out in about a year's time. And that, again, will cover a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today, but in a kind of, as I say, hopefully in a very accessible way. So you can look out for that one.
Well, I'm looking forward to that book, and I'll definitely contact you after I read that.
Okay.
Professor French, thank you very much.
My pleasure.